Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at bankruptcy law.
Okay.
And you might be surprised by just how much history and philosophy
Right.
is wrapped up in this area of the law.
It's true.
We're going to be using Geraci Law as a lens to explore some of
Wow.
these ideas.
Sounds good.
So where do we even begin? Like,
Yeah.
where does this concept
We've-
of bankruptcy even come from?
You might be surprised to learn that bankruptcy actually has biblical roots.
Really?
Yeah, so the idea of debt forgiveness is woven into ancient texts like Deuteronomy,
Interesting.
which talks about releasing debts every 7 years.
Okay.
And I'm sure you're familiar with the line from the Lord's Prayer
Mhm.
in Matthew 6.12,
Uh-huh.
forgive us our debts
Right.
as we forgive our debtors.
So debt forgiveness is a core principle going back thousands of years.
Absolutely.
So how does Geraci Law
Well,
fit into all of this?
and that's where it gets really interesting.
It's okay.
So Geraci Law's motto is, nice people doing nice things for nice people, which really seems to echo this ancient idea of compassion and second chances.
Mm.
They view bankruptcy as both a legal right and a moral one,
Okay.
a safety valve for honest individuals who are facing tough financial times.
I'm starting to see how they position themselves within this broader
Yeah.
historical and ethical context.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to admit, when I think of bankruptcy, I don't usually picture Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
What's the connection there?
So this is one of those surprise and facts that make history come alive.
Okay.
Abraham Lincoln, before he became president, was actually a bankruptcy lawyer.
Wow.
Back in the 1840s, he spent a good chunk of his time handling debt lawsuits and helping people navigate financial distress.
Right.
And what makes this even more intriguing is that Peter Francis, Geraci's great-great-grandfather, was also a lawyer in Illinois around the same time, and he even knew Lincoln.
Wow. So there's this direct link between Geraci Law
Yeah,
and one of the most iconic figures in American history.
absolutely.
And speaking of America's foundations, didn't the founding fathers have something to say about bankruptcy too?
They absolutely did.
Okay.
In fact, they were so concerned with ensuring freedom from the burden of debt that they included it right there in the U.S. Constitution.
Oh,
Article 3, Section 8 explicitly addresses bankruptcy,
okay.
making it clear that this wasn't some fringe concept. It was woven into the very fabric of the nation.
So we've gone from ancient biblical texts to the Constitution itself.
Right.
It's pretty clear that the concept of bankruptcy has deep roots
Absolutely.
and has been viewed as an essential part of a just society for centuries.
For a long time, yeah.
So Geraci Law very much sees itself as part of this long tradition.
Uh-huh.
They believe that bankruptcy is a right, not a privilege,
Mm-hmm.
a way for honest, hardworking people to get a fresh start when they need it.
Right.
So are they saying that anyone facing financial hardship should just file for bankruptcy?
What?
Is it that simple?
Geraci Law does specialize in helping individuals navigate bankruptcy. But they also emphasize the importance of making informed choices.
Okay.
They actually advocate very strongly against debt settlement,
Okay.
arguing that it often involves high fees and doesn't always guarantee a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
They believe that for many people, Chapter 13 bankruptcy is a more reliable and often more affordable option.
Okay, so there's more nuance to this than just filing for bankruptcy.
Right.
What exactly is Chapter 13, and why does Geraci Law seem to favor it?
So Chapter 13 is all about restructuring your debt.
Okay.
Instead of an immediate discharge of all debts, which is what many people associate with bankruptcy,
Right.
Chapter 13 involves working out a plan with the court and your creditors to repay your debts over a period of 3 to 5 years.
So that sounds like it takes a lot of careful planning and negotiation.
It does, but Geraci Law is the largest filer of Chapter 13 bankruptcies in the country.
Really?
So they have extensive experience in this area.
Okay.
They believe that this approach allows people to keep their assets like a house or a car, which might be at risk in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which is more about liquidation.
So they're really focusing on long-term solutions, helping people get back on their feet financially and avoid losing what they've worked for.
Absolutely.
It's a big part of their philosophy. And it's interesting to note that while Chapter 13 might seem more complex on the surface, it can often result in lower monthly payments than debt settlement.
Right.
And you might not even have to pay interest on the debts you're repaying.
Exactly.
This is all really insightful, but I think we need to take a step back and clarify some things for our listeners.
Okay.
When we're talking about discharge of debts,
Mm-hmm.
what exactly does that mean?
Yeah.
And who are these creditors we keep mentioning?
Good point. It's easy to get lost in the legal jargon when we talk about a discharge in bankruptcy.
Right.
We're essentially talking about a legal order from the court that releases you from personal liability for certain debts. It's like getting a clean slate, a fresh start.
All right.
And creditors are simply the people or institutions to whom you owe money. Okay.
They could be banks, credit card companies, medical providers, even individuals.
Gotcha. So it's not that the debts just disappear into thin air.
Right.
It's more like the court steps in and says, you've done what you can.
Yeah,
This debt is no longer your responsibility.
exactly.
Okay.
And this idea of a court-supervised process is key to understanding how bankruptcy works.
Okay.
It's not a free-for-all.
Right.
It's a structured system with rules and procedures designed to ensure fairness for both debtors and creditors.
That makes sense. It's all starting to come together now.
Good.
But this is a lot of information to take in.
Yeah.
And I imagine some of our listeners might be feeling overwhelmed.
I understand bankruptcy can be a complex and intimidating process,
Right.
but Geraci Law seems to recognize that.
Yeah.
They've actually created some really helpful educational resources to guide people through it.
Oh, okay.
They offer a free non-bankruptcy credit counseling course, which is available on their website, infotapes.com.
Wait, of course, before you even file for bankruptcy, what's the purpose of that? It's all about empowering people with knowledge before they make any decisions.
Okay.
This course covers topics like budget and debt management and, of course, different bankruptcy options.
Okay.
It's a way for people to understand their situation and make informed choices about their financial future.
That's fantastic. It sounds like they're really going above and beyond just the legal process.
Yeah.
They're investing in educating people, helping them understand their rights and options.
Mm-hmm.
But what about after someone files for bankruptcy? What kind of resources are available then?
There's another course, the Post-Filing Debtor Educational Course, and this one is required by law after you file for bankruptcy.
Okay.
But Geraci Law's version is unique because it's actually written and taught by Peter Francis Geraci himself.
Wow, so you're getting insight straight from a seasoned bankruptcy attorney?
Yeah,
That's incredible access to expertise.
it is.
Tell me more about this course.
It's designed to help people understand the post-bankruptcy landscape. It covers practical topics like rebuilding credit management finances responsibly and avoiding common pitfalls.
Okay.
It's not just a dry legal course. It's filled with practical advice and real-world examples from someone who's been in the trenches for decades.
Wow.
You can find this course at pfgg.com.
So it sounds like they're not just helping people through the legal process, but they're also equipping them with the tools and knowledge to build a more stable financial future.
Right.
That's a powerful message, and it really challenges the negative stigma often associated with bankruptcy.
Yeah, it does.
It does. And it makes you think about the broader societal implications of debt and financial responsibility.
Absolutely.
You know, that's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from the ancient origins of bankruptcy to the specific approach taken by Geraci Law. But I think it's time to zoom out a little and look at the bigger picture.
I agree.
This is where things get really interesting, so stay tuned as we continue our deep dive.
Sounds good. It's fascinating to think about how the laws surrounding bankruptcy have shifted over time.
Yeah?
You know, in ancient societies, like those mentioned in the Bible,
Uh-huh.
debt was often viewed as a moral failing.
Really?
And debtors could even be imprisoned or sold into slavery.
Oh, wow. That's a stark contrast to how we view it today, at least in the United States.
Right.
How did that shift happen?
Well, as societies evolved and economies became more complex, there was a growing recognition that sometimes financial hardship was due to circumstances beyond an individual's control.
Okay.
The idea of offering a fresh start, a chance to escape the cycle of debt, began to take hold.
So it's not just about forgiving debt. It's about recognizing the complexities of economic systems.
Right.
And the fact that sometimes people need a safety net.
Exactly. And as we moved into the modern era, the concept of bankruptcy became increasingly codified in law.
What?
The United States, with its emphasis on individual liberty and economic opportunity, was one of the first countries to establish a formal bankruptcy system.
And we already talked about how the Founding Fathers saw this as so fundamental
Right.
that they included it in the Constitution.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious, how did their vision of bankruptcy play out in the early days of the nation?
Well, it wasn't always smooth sailing.
Okay.
There were debates and disagreements about how exactly bankruptcy should work, who should be eligible, and what types of debts should be dischargeable. But the core principle remained.
Okay.
The idea that honest individuals facing insurmountable debt deserved a chance to rebuild their lives.
So there's always been this tension between personal responsibility and the need for compassion and second chances.
Absolutely. And as the American economy grew and industrialized, the bankruptcy system had to adapt to new challenges.
Okay.
The rise of corporations, the expansion of credit, and periodic economic downturns all influenced how bankruptcy laws were interpreted and applied.
That makes sense.
Right.
The legal system is never static. It has to evolve to reflect the changing realities of society.
Exactly. And as we moved into the 20th century, we saw significant developments in bankruptcy law.
Okay.
The Great Depression, for example, led to reforms aimed at providing relief to farmers and homeowners struggling with foreclosures.
Right.
And the rise of consumer credit in the post-war era led to further changes to address personal debt.
So it's like each era has its own unique set of economic challenges, and the
Yeah.
bankruptcy system has had to adjust accordingly.
Right. And in the late 20th and early 21st centuries,
Right.
we've seen a rise in the complexity of bankruptcy law, with new chapters added to address specific types of debt, like student loans or medical bills.
So we've gone from this very basic concept of debt forgiveness in ancient times to this intricate legal system we have today.
Right.
But through it all, that core principle of offering a fresh start seems to have remained a constant.
It has. And I think Geraci Law, with its focus on helping individuals navigate this complex system and providing them with the resources and support they need, really embodies that spirit.
They're not just about the legal technicalities. They're about understanding the human impact of debt and helping people find a path forward.
And their emphasis on Chapter 13, as opposed to Chapter 7, which is more about liquidation, reflects this commitment to finding long-term solutions.
You know, I have to admit, I'm still a little fuzzy on the distinction between these two chapters.
Okay.
Can you break it down for us again in plain English?
Of course, think of it this way. Chapter 7 is like hitting the reset button.
Okay.
It's designed for people who have very limited assets and income,
Okay.
and it allows for a relatively quick discharge of most unsecured debts, like credit cards and medical bills.
So it's the more immediate relief option.
Exactly. But the trade-off is that you might have to give up certain assets,
Okay.
like a second car or a vacation home, if they exceed certain exemption limits.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about Chapter 13? How does that work?
Chapter 13 is more like a financial reorganization.
Okay.
It's designed for people who have a steady income and want to keep their assets, like their house or car. It involves working out a plan with the court and your creditors to repay a portion of your debts over a period of 3 to 5 years.
So it's more about restructuring your finances and getting back on track over time.
Precisely. And as we mentioned earlier, Geraci Law believes that this approach is often more beneficial for individuals in the long run.
Okay.
It allows you to maintain ownership of your assets, potentially avoid higher interest rates, and develop more sustainable financial habits.
This all makes sense in theory, but I imagine for someone facing a mountain of debt,
Right.
it can still feel overwhelming.
It can.
How does Geraci Law actually guide people through this process?
Well, they take a very client-centered approach.
Okay.
They start by providing a free consultation to assess your individual situation and determine if bankruptcy is the right option for you.
Okay.
They'll gather information about your income, expenses, assets, and debts to get a clear picture of your financial landscape.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. They really tailor their advice to each client's specific needs.
That seems to be their philosophy.
Okay.
They believe that each case is unique, and they take the time to understand your individual circumstances before recommending a course of action.
That must be really reassuring for people who are feeling lost and unsure of where to turn.
Absolutely. And remember those educational resources we talked about?
Yes.
The non-bankruptcy credit counseling course and the post-filing debtor educational course?
Right.
Those are key components of Geraci Law's approach.
So they're not just providing legal representation, they're empowering people with knowledge and information so they can make informed decisions.
Exactly. They believe that informed clients are better equipped to navigate the complexities of bankruptcy and make choices that align with their long-term goals.
This is all incredibly insightful, but I think we need to address the elephant in the room. There's often a stigma associated with bankruptcy,
Yeah.
a sense of shame or failure.
Right.
How does Geraci Law address that?
That's a great question, and I think it's something they're very aware of. Their motto, nice people doing nice things for nice people, seems to be an intentional effort to challenge that stigma. They view bankruptcy not as a moral failing, but as a legal tool, a safety valve for honest individuals facing difficult circumstances.
They're trying to shift the narrative to reframe bankruptcy as a path to a fresh start, not an end-in.
Exactly. And their client-centered approach, their emphasis on education and long-term solutions all contribute to this effort to humanize the process and empower individuals to take control of their financial futures.
It's about recognizing that sometimes life throws you curveballs,
Yeah.
and seeking help is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength.
And Geraci Law seems to be creating a space where people can do just that seek help, get informed, and take steps toward a brighter financial future without judgment or shame.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the ancient history of bankruptcy to the nuanced approach of Geraci Law. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on what we've discussed.
I think the biggest takeaway is that bankruptcy is a much more complex and multifaceted issue than most people realize.
Yeah.
It's deeply intertwined with our history, our values, and our economic system.
It's not just a legal process. It's a reflection of who we are as a society and how we choose to address financial hardship.
And while Geraci Law offers a valuable service in helping individuals navigate this system, I think it's also important for each of us to reflect on the broader implications of debt and financial responsibility, both individually and as a society.
You're right, and that's a perfect segue into the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore those broader implications and leave our listeners with some food for thought.
Let's dive in and consider what we can all learn from the history and evolution of bankruptcy and how we can work together to create a more just and equitable financial system. As we've been exploring the world of bankruptcy law through the lens of Geraci Law, it's become clear that this topic is about so much more than just legalities and finances.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It really touches on some fundamental questions about our values as a society, our sense of fairness,
Right.
and how we balance individual responsibility with the need for compassion.
And I think that's where things get really interesting, at least for me. We've talked about the historical and legal aspects of bankruptcy, but what does it say about us as a culture? How do our attitudes toward debt and financial struggles shape our social fabric?
Those are big questions.
They are.
And I have to admit, I'm not sure I have all the answers.
Right.
But I do think it's important to ask them.
Yeah.
After all, bankruptcy isn't just some abstract legal concept.
Right.
It affects real people every day. It impacts families, communities, and even the economy as a whole.
Absolutely. And when we look at the sheer number of people who file for bankruptcy each year, it's clear that this is a widespread issue. It's not just a few isolated cases.
Right.
It's a reflection of broader trends and challenges within our society.
So what are some of those trends? What factors contribute to this high rate of bankruptcy?
Well, there are many contributing factors.
Right.
But some of the most common include things like job loss, medical emergencies, unexpected expenses, predatory lending practices, and a lack of financial literacy.
That makes sense. Life can be unpredictable.
It can.
And sometimes even the most responsible people can find themselves in situations where they're simply unable to keep up with their debts.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that bankruptcy isn't always a sign of irresponsibility.
Right.
Sometimes it's simply the result of unforeseen circumstances.
It's about recognizing that everyone's financial journey is different.
Yeah.
And that sometimes people need a lifeline.
And that's where the concept of a fresh start becomes so crucial.
Okay.
Bankruptcy can provide individuals with an opportunity to break free from the crushing weight of debt and rebuild their lives.
It's like hitting the reset button, gaining a sense of control and starting a new chapter.
I think that's a powerful idea.
Yeah.
The possibility of redemption.
Right. The belief that even after facing financial setbacks, individuals can regain their footing and achieve financial stability.
But of course, bankruptcy isn't a magic solution.
It's not.
It comes with its own challenges, and it's not a decision to be taken lightly.
Absolutely. It's important for individuals to understand the implications of bankruptcy, both in the short term and the long term.
Right. It can impact your credit score, your ability to secure loans, and even your employment prospects in some cases.
And that's why it's so crucial to seek guidance from experienced professionals like those at Geraci Law.
Okay.
They can help individuals weigh the pros and cons of bankruptcy and determine if it's the right path for their specific situation.
They can also provide support and guidance throughout the entire process, ensuring that individuals understand their rights and obligations.
And that's something that's often overlooked.
What's that?
The emotional toll that debt can take on individuals.
Right.
The stress, the anxiety, the feeling of hopelessness. It's not just about the numbers.
It's about the human impact.
And I think Geraci Law recognizes that their client-centered approach, their emphasis on education and empowerment.
Yeah.
It all speaks to a deeper understanding of the challenges individuals face.
They're not just lawyers. They're advocates.
Right.
They're counselors. They're there to help people navigate a complex and often stressful situation.
And their commitment to providing a fresh start resonates with this idea that everyone deserves a second chance.
It's about recognizing that financial setbacks don't define a person, and that with the right support and resources, individuals can overcome these challenges and achieve financial well-being.
And, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of bankruptcy law, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is an ongoing conversation.
It
It's
is.
a topic that will continue to evolve and be debated as our society and economy change.
Absolutely. And while we've explored the legal and historical aspects of bankruptcy, I think the most important takeaway is the human element.
The stories of individuals struggling with debt, the families impacted by financial hardship, the communities grappling with economic challenges.
These are the stories that remind us that bankruptcy is more than just a legal concept. It's a reflection of our shared humanity.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together,
Right.
and that finding solutions that work for both individuals and society as a whole requires empathy,
Absolutely.
understanding, and a willingness to engage in open and honest dialogue.
And with that thought-provoking note, we'll conclude our deep dive into the world of bankruptcy law.
Okay?
We hope you found this exploration insightful
Yes.
and that it sparked your own curiosity about this complex and often misunderstood topic.
Remember that seeking help when you need it is a sign of strength, not weakness.
It is.
And while bankruptcy may not be the right solution for everyone,
Right.
it's a valuable tool that can provide a fresh start and a path to a brighter financial future for those who need it.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.